The house. I drove past High Brazil hundreds of times as a child, with its disappearing and reappearing stone eagle statue on the plinth on the wall outside. However, I was not afforded the opportunity to go inside her until much later in life. I had come into money and could finally buy the house of my dreams. High Brazil was built out of love. The story that most people in the town know as truth, but in reality probably has a bit of legend thrown in, is that a Welsh lawyer who owned a smaller cottage at the site visited Italy for a holiday in 1912 and fell in love with an Italian countess. The lawyer, hoping it was more than a holiday romance, returned to his cottage and added a Mediterranean extension to his property, hoping to entice the countess to join him. The idea being that the house would make her less homesick. She never came. From its inception, it was an unlucky and unfortunate property. Families were known to break up shortly after moving into her, and she was always in need of repair. Even with that in mind, I had always wanted it. And now, finally, I had my chance. When I bought it, it was empty and derelict. I contacted the agent and bought it without ever seeing inside. I collected the keys and immediately drove there to look at my prize. I felt like a kid at Christmas. I pulled up and unlocked the massive iron gates before driving into the courtyard. The house had a presence, and I instantly felt it. I walked around the outside of the property first, looking at the structure and the grounds. It was much bigger than I could have ever imagined. The property needed much work, but I wanted to be involved in everything, and so I moved a bed and television into one of the downstairs living spaces. I had to be there while the work was taking place. I contacted an architect and designer to draw up the plans for the renovations, and then I contacted a variety of workmen to carry out the required work. The first thing I did was replace the eagle that I had remembered seeing as a child on its plinth. The incident started almost immediately. On the first night I slept there, I heard the constant creaking of floorboards. Being an old house, I thought nothing of it. The creaks occurred throughout the house on both levels. They never stopped. It took a few weeks before any work could begin, but the architects, planners and workmen were constantly coming and going. None of them heard anything. Within a month, the creaks were now accompanied by doors slamming and knocking noises. Despite constant investigation, I was never able to locate the knocks or a breeze that would close doors. I reached a stage that before settling in for bed every night, I would walk around the whole house to make sure all the doors were closed. The slamming continued. I was never one to be startled or easily spooked, but after 2 months, I realized something was not quite right. I had moved my bed and television so that I was now always facing the door, and I began closing the door to sleep, something I had never done previously. Once the work had begun, the builders began complaining about tools being moved or lost. I pleaded ignorance every time. I'd spent too much money on buying and renovating my dream property. I was not going to be scared away by a few odd occurrences. I was sure that once all the work was done, all the repairs were made, and all the furniture was in, that things would settle down. It was 6 months from the time I first walked in till the time all the work was complete and all my furniture was in. It finally felt like home, and the surreal incidents had become less common, although they had not stopped. I felt confident enough to start inviting people around and showing them my pride and joy. After a night out with a lady who I had only recently met, I asked her to come back to my place, and she agreed. I poured us a couple of glasses of red wine, started a fire, put some music on, and we settled on the sofa for a chat. After a while, things became more heated and we started to kiss. Whilst kissing, a strong breeze blew into the room, blowing her hair and startling her to such an extent that she jumped, knocking her red wine off the table onto my shaggy deep pile rug. I got up to go to the kitchen to get a cloth, and on my return she was sitting wide-eyed, glaring straight at the door and as white as a sheet. She got up and insisted on leaving. I asked her if she was okay. She said she was, but insisted on going anyway. I told her I would call a taxi. She said she could not wait and said she would start to walk and flag one down. Despite my wishes, she rushed out the front door and onto the main road. I cleaned up the mess, thinking maybe I had rushed her into things, and went to bed, not thinking any more of the incident. 2 days passed, and I decided to phone her to see how she was doing. She then told me what had happened. Shortly after I had left the room, she felt someone sit down next to her. They moved her hair and whispered in her ear to leave. She claimed she had never been so scared in her life. I profusely apologized, but really had no idea what to say. I became very reluctant to invite people around after that incident, and so decided to buy a dog for some company, and maybe to stop myself going crazy. Now, High Brazil has massive grounds, including its own cemetery. I was always a little freaked out by cemeteries, so when I was having the work done, I'd asked the workmen to build a wall around it, essentially putting it outside of the property. Unfortunately, one thing that cemeteries seem to have an abundance of is rats. Given that the grounds were so big, the dog spent much of the day outside. He was constantly bringing me dead rats as gifts. One thing I did not realize, though, was that cemeteries also attract snakes. Growing up in Wales, snakes are things that you never even consider coming across, as they are so rare. But on one sunny day in July, 9 months after I had moved in, I heard a massive yelp from outside. I rushed out to see my dog shaking on the floor and a snake going under the wall into the cemetery. I immediately rushed him to the vet, where he was treated. The vet gave him an injection, treated the wound, gave me some medication and ointment for him, and told me that he would need a lot of TLC over the next few weeks. I set up his own little corner in the living room, bed, blankets, toys, bowls, the lot. He loved it. The dog and I spent 3 relaxing, undisturbed days with this setup. Then something happened that changed me forever. The dog and I were bewitched up on the sofa. I wanted a drink, so I got up to make myself a coffee. I had been gone less than 5 minutes when I heard a bark, a yelp, and a commotion. I rushed back into the living room to see that all the furniture had been moved around. The sofa that had taken 2 people to move was now on the other side of the room. The coffee table had flipped over, and the TV had been pulled off the wall and smashed on the floor. I found my dog behind the sofa, shaking and with his hair standing on end. There was no way I was staying there that night. I grabbed my dog, jumped in the car, and drove to a friend's house. I explained everything that had happened and asked if we could stay there for the night. They agreed. I returned the next day, but things had changed. I no longer felt the same way about the house anymore. As I was putting all the furniture back in place, I began thinking of what to do with the house. Should I sell it, or should I call in a priest? Something I would never have even thought of previously, but this could not go on. I decided to Google hauntings online and see any possible solutions. I came across the contact information of a woman who called herself a spiritual cleanser. I contacted her and told her my story. She said it sounded like a classic haunting, but she wouldn't be able to come to the house for 2 weeks because she was terribly busy. Who knew that this was so common? She suggested burning sage in the meantime. I took her up on her advice, but it did not help. In fact, it made the situation worse. Every time I lit the sage, it was instantly blown out by a breeze. All the lights would flicker and doors would shake and rattle as I was looking at them. I could no longer stay there. I packed a suitcase and left, booking myself into the Travelodge in the town centre for a few days until I could find somewhere to rent. 2 weeks passed and it was time for the spiritual cleanser. She contacted me in the morning, and by the time I arrived at the house, she was already waiting outside. I unlocked the big iron gates and we both drove our vehicles in. As we alighted from our cars, she pointed to the wall and asked what was behind it. I asked why. She said she felt incredible pain and anxiety coming from there. I explained that it was a family cemetery of everyone who had lived in the house. She shook her head and explained that it was never a good idea to live so near to a cemetery, especially if you now occupy the same property that the people in the cemetery once did. She said she could feel more than one presence. She prepared her kit that consisted of a bundle of sage, holy water, and a book of incantations that she herself had written. It was a disaster from the moment we entered. I opened the front door to let us both in. As soon as we stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind us and I was unable to reopen it. We took turns in pulling, but to no avail. Fear crept over us, but we knew we had to deal with it, whatever it was. We proceeded to walk down the hallway into the heart of the house, and she lit her sage. A huge draught instantly blew through the whole house, extinguishing the flame, rattling the doors and windows, and chilling us to our core. She then began to read from her book, whispering at first, but slowly building to a shout. Her incantations were met with a guttural shriek of "Leave!" I'd never heard the voice before. The response only made the cleanser more agitated, and she began to rant, flicking holy water all over the walls and floor and shaking her smouldering sage bunch. "Leave now!" echoed through the rooms. She continued with her recitations. All the doors and windows now began to aggressively rattle as the presence repeated its command to leave. At this point, I was frozen to the spot, staring at the floor, hoping it would swallow me up, unable to comprehend what was actually happening. I just wanted all of this to end. She continued still, and she was scratched down the side of her face by something unseen. She continued with her incantations, even as her blood began to soak into her top. Suddenly she stopped. I could see her being choked, but there was nothing there. I could clearly see her throat being compressed and her struggling to fight it. Panicking, I shouted, "All right, we will leave, just let her go." The presence threw the cleanser across the hall into the wall. The rattling stopped, and the front door opened. I went to collect her, helping her up from the floor, her top now covered in blood and tears. We both exited into the courtyard, where we regathered our thoughts. She tells me that she had done dozens of cleansings but had never been physically attacked before. Her advice: get out. I never set foot in High Brazil ever again after that. I hired a team of specialist removers to go pack up and collect my belongings before putting her back up for sale again. They never reported anything strange. I guess the house was just happy that I was leaving. I found a place further down the valley to rent for a few years before I moved on. I still drive past High Brazil occasionally. It is deserted again. Even though High Brazil is a two-story building, it has a roof terrace. The locals say that on dark nights, if you are unlucky, you can still see shapes and movement up there. The eagle is once again missing.